Racing games from the 90s were something special, at least for me. So in this video we are going to take a look at 10 racing games from 10 years. Those are not necessarily going to be the best games from this year, far from it, but they are interesting, or at least I have something to say about them, or maybe I'm just nostalgic about them and I'm using this video as an excuse to play them again. Let's get started with 1990. What a great game to start this list. Stunts is just as fun as it was 34 years ago, if you can look beyond the antiquated graphics. And no wonder, with Distinctive Software as the developer who later became EA Canada and brought us the legendary Need for Speed series. The car handling is pure arcade fun, though you might need a bit of time to get used to it, especially with the faster cars as it's quite sensitive. But it's also precise and challenging, especially on the crazy courses of the game that include loops, corkscrews and different terrains. And the best part, of course, is the track editor. I've spent dozens of hours creating my own devious tracks and challenging my friends to beat my records. It's so user-friendly, yet the resulting tracks can vary greatly in playability. The game offers a diverse selection of vehicles and opponents, enriching the gameplay experience. And it also features replay functionality, which was unheard of at that time. Stunts is truly the complete package, which is astonishing for a game that's that old. Okay, I have a confession to make. Lotus was not released on DOS in 1991, but in 1992. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a racing game in 91 that I ever played, so I thought, well, Lotus 2 released in 1991 on the Amiga, which was never ported to DOS, but is similar enough to Lotus 3, which then was ported in 1992, that I could talk about that game instead. And if that wasn't even bad enough, I also tricked you with a soundtrack. What you are listening now is the Amiga version of the soundtrack, and the game sounded quite differently on PC, because it didn't use tracker music but MIDI instead. So this is how the game actually sounded on my Adlib sound card back then. Lotus is a very fun outrun clone. You have a car, a winding road and a race towards the horizon. Besides the banger soundtrack and the split-screen multiplayer, Lotus 3 also comes with a track editor. You see, a reoccurring theme in this video. This editor is not as comprehensive though, because you can't build your own track layout, but just randomly generate tracks with adjustable characteristics. Still fun though, and kept me entertained for quite a while. Or Formula 1 Grand Prix as it was called in Germany wasn't my first racing simulation. That would go to Indianapolis 500, but it was my first Formula 1 game. And that was special to me. I was never a big sports fan, but a friend of mine and especially his father were huge Formula 1 fans, and especially in 91 when the German racer Michael Schumacher joined the field, we stayed up late at night watching the races together. That's really a special memory to me because, well, I was just 10 years old and staying up at night was something that my parents normally would not allow me to do. So I'm still not a big sports fan today, but if there's a sport that still interests me at least a bit, then it would be Formula 1. Now coming back to this game, I was a bit hesitant because, well, racing simulation can be a bit intimidating, especially if you have no practice, but I was pleasantly surprised that the game is actually very easy to get into, especially if you have the driving aids enabled. So I was having a great time, so much so actually that I also installed the sequel, which is very much the same game but with better graphics, more content, more options, and it also has the original driver and team names, which is a big plus if you don't want to edit those yourself. So comparing World Circuit to the last F1 game I played, which was F1 2020 I think, this one is actually a lot more arcadey and hits just this sweet spot where it's easy to get into but still enough challenge that it makes you feel that you're driving an actual F1 car. If you're enjoying yourself watching this, then maybe consider subscribing to the channel. I have a lot more retro gaming videos on here and you'll be notified if anything new comes up.
Hell of a way to run a war.
Either they replace the war with Cyberrace, or they let the entire galaxy be destroyed.
They can have it.
People believe if you can control the black hole, you can control the galaxy.
Now the year starts to become more crowded, and you might wonder why I'm not talking about the amazing IndyCar racing here, or about the great sky roads, the good slick and slide, or the very mediocre Scunny kart. Because this is my list and I just wanted to talk about this game. Cyberrace was my first real bad buy. I was dazzled by the great game box and made a spontaneous purchase instead of informing myself about the game beforehand. If I had seen the measly 27% rating in PC Player and Boris Schneider's comment calling the game software trash and criticizing the developers for not having any clue about game design, I probably would have refrained from buying it. But now here we are 30 years later talking about a game that tries to be Wing Commander but more closely resembles Plan 9 from outer space. Now you know me, I love my cringy cutscenes, I'm all into sci-fi and I appreciate voxel graphics, so this game should be right up my alley. But the moment you actually take control of your glider, it's all just a chaotic mess. Now how can I explain that best? Normally in racing games, when you want to do a left turn, you hold down your left arrow until you've done your left turn, and well, a right turn the other way around. But in this game you tap the arrow keys to move your steering wheel in one direction, but you have to tap the other direction to move it back. So if you have tapped the right key one time, you slowly go to the right until you tap the left key again to go straight. If you tap it multiple times, you start to make sharper turns. At least in theory, but in reality there's such a delay because the glider has this momentum that it's extremely unresponsive. And until you get used to it, which takes a while, you just be spinning around randomly and have no idea what you're doing. Oh, and besides racing, you're also supposed to target enemies and shoot them down. And they constantly bombard you, and every time you get hit, you spin around uncontrollable and you have to try to move in the other direction to stop spinning, and then you have to reorient yourself where the track is. It's a nightmare. I mostly ignored all the mechanics, just tried to get somehow to the end of the race, and well, I actually earned some money and the game progressed, so maybe I wasn't doing that bad. I spent all that money on upgrades, which is nice, but well, I didn't really feel a difference there, because you can't upgrade the steering and make it more controllable. You can upgrade armor, get new weapons and stuff like that, and have a nitro to go even faster, which I would never want to do in this game. I mean, generally you have these winding tracks on the ground, but you just ignore all that, because it's also okay if you just go the general direction of the track, which is good because, well, it's impossible to really follow the track. So after hitting your head against the wall enough times, you complete the race and progress the story, and that's actually the one point I do like. I mean, the story is stupid and makes no sense, but it's quite entertaining and there are not many story-focused sci-fi racing games out there. Okay, I think that's really all there is to say about Cyberrace, and continue to the next one. No, don't worry, we're not going to talk about F 2022, but about the game from the same legendary developer, Codemasters. A whopping 28 years earlier, they released a little game called Micro Machines. Now the first game of the series has released on MS-DOS in '94 that you're seeing playing in the background here. But I'd rather talk about the sequel, which released the same year but only for Sega consoles and 1 year later on MS-DOS. Because it's a much more interesting game than the first one, but at its core it's mostly the same. Now I could have also picked Wacky Wheels for 94, but I've already made a video about that on the Apogee top list, or I could talk about Mega Race, but I've already done that in my FMV video. So Micro Machines is a nice little top-down racing game that's best played against friends. I still very much like the idea of these miniature cars driving on tables or the backyard, having these enormous upscaled objects as obstacles. And about that reoccurring theme, it also has a track editor, and not only that, but it also boasts a small little sprite editor which can modify the cars that you race and the tiles from the tracks. The one thing I really don't like so much about the game is that you race really fast and can't look a lot ahead, and there are many opportunities to fall from the track and have to respawn. So you only stand a chance by memorizing the tracks, which can be a bit annoying, especially if you want to play with a friend and he hadn't played the game before. Still a very fun little game with a variety of vehicles and game modes that should keep you entertained for a while. Fatal Racing, or Whiplash as it's also called, is the next game on our list. In my opinion, very pretty looking arcade racer that has crazy tracks with loops and corkscrews and so on, and I just have a soft spot for these unshaded pixelated 3D graphics. Otherwise you get some decent arcade racing mechanics, though the game can be a bit disorienting with all the ups and downs and crazy track layouts, but after a few turns you get accustomed to that and you're really starting to enjoy yourself. You will bump into things though and take damage, but there's a pit where you can repair your car anytime you want. I don't think there's much more to say about this game, just give it a try and have some good old simple arcade fun. Screamer 2, or as it is called in Germany, Bleifuß 2, is the last DOS game in this list, and it's probably also my favorite game from the whole list. If you ask me what's the best arcade racing game of all time, it's not going to be Ridge Racer, it's not going to be Daytona USA or Need for Speed, it's this one. Maybe it's because the driving physics are a bit more on the simulation side, maybe it's because of the gorgeous graphics or the very challenging computer opponents. It's just a blast to slide through those corners and jump over the hills, always trying to find the spot where you can overtake your opponents. You've got a selection of 7 tracks and 20 different cars that are assigned to 4 different teams that you can choose from. The game has your typical arcade and time trial modes, but you also got the championship that has different levels that you have to unlock, and those will also unlock new tracks for the arcade mode. But don't get yourself fooled by the simple controls. Handling your car on the different surfaces can be very difficult and each car drives very differently. But even though this can be frustrating at times, it always comes down to your skill level and is never really unfair. There are difficulty settings for the arcade mode, but during the championship, each championship level will determine how clever your opponents will behave. I really love the colorful and varied tracks rushing by at a fluent 50 FPS, which was not yet a standard for racing games back then. But you really needed a very beefy computer as well to run this game, especially in the high-res mode. The game also comes with 2-player split screen, which is amazing for arcade racers as we all know, but also has a network gameplay mode if you have multiple PCs. So in my opinion the game is pretty much perfect. I wouldn't know what to improve other than, well, maybe make a remaster or something like that with even better graphics, but you should definitely give it a go if you haven't yet. It's just so much fun to play. – 1997, and we get to our first rally game. I always found rally racing interesting because driving a car on rough surfaces just gives you a very different feeling than racing on a track. The unique challenge of constantly having to keep your car under control while trying to push it to its absolute limits can be a lot of fun. Though over the years I've learned that the more realistic rally racing games are not so much my cup of tea because, well, they can be really hard, and if I feel that I struggle more with a car than with times or with opponents, that's just a bit too stressful for me. So International Rally Championship is right up my alley. It's more arcade-like and you have great control over the car, but it still feels realistic enough to portray the rally racing in a convincing way. The presentation is also great, I think. I especially like the very saturated colors and the different settings, so it's never getting boring while you're on the track, and you have the great atmosphere. For example, if you race in first person and you're racing through a snowstorm or through the fog, that can be really exciting. And I also remember how much I liked the option to have endurance races back then, so you can have real long races for 10, 50, 20 minutes I think, and that was something very special because there are not many games allowed to do that, and I really liked the challenge to put myself in all alone on the road and trying to get to the finish line. And you might guess it, this game also comes with a track editor, so it was another one I spent way too much time with. The editor is a bit similar to the one in Lotus, so you don't actually build the track piece by piece, instead you just change the configuration, but there are two things that this game has over Lotus, I think, is that you have different sections in the track, so with that you can actually create a more handcrafted experience, I would say. And the other thing is that just the racing itself is more complex, so the tracks make a much bigger difference than the tracks in Lotus, so every time you create your own track you really feel how differently it plays. It's still a great game that aged with grace and you can very much enjoy it today. And a little tip if you want to run the game under Windows 10, at least for me I had to go into the game settings and put every details on the highest level because otherwise the game would crash, but once I did that it just played fine. So obviously I can't talk about 90s racing games without mentioning the Need for Speed. I decided to go with a lesser known Need for Speed High Stakes though, because I think the other games in the series really got enough coverage. High Stakes, or as it was called in Germany, Brennender Asphalt, did not revolutionize the Need for Speed gameplay. The game was quite similar to its predecessor Hot Pursuit, but added a few interesting new elements. The new two main features were the career mode and the car damage model. And I really appreciated those additions because I'm a sucker for progression in games, so I really like the career where you have to earn money, you can buy new cars. That added a whole new layer of replayability for me and kept me hooked much longer than just having single races or tournaments. And the damage model, what can I say? Already in the first Need for Speed I just love to race the track in the wrong direction just to crash into my opponents or maybe into oncoming traffic. And it was not just a few scratches how the modern racing games sometimes try to get away with, but actual deformation, though you can't lose any parts as far as I remember. That's actually the one feature I would love to see in new racing games like Forza or Gran Turismo. But, well, we haven't got a decent damage model in quite a while in those games, so I don't have my hopes up high. There's this rumor that it's because of licensing issues that the car manufacturers don't want to see their cars destroyed or something like that. But I also heard that most manufacturers would actually be okay with that, so maybe it's just for consistency reasons, or maybe it's just too much work with the high detailed car models that we have nowadays. As said before, the game is quite similar to Hot Pursuit, so you have your street races, you have cops chasing you, you can also play as a cop and try to catch the other racers, and I guess that's also the reason why there wasn't a High Stakes 2 but a Hot Pursuit 2, because both series were just a bit similar. Speaking of Hot Pursuit 2, I really loved that game as well. I think I spent more time with that than High Stakes, so I feel I have to revisit that soon.
316 to Central, still ahead, drivers in custody. Tango Alpha 316, affirmative. 316
Da haben sie wohl nur Bahnhof verstanden. Wie? Sorry, I got all German for a second here, but make no mistake, this is a very German game. Autobahnraser is a real cult classic in our country. Believe it or not, it had 12 sequels and even its own movie.
Alex, ich hab mir solche Sorgen gemacht.
Ach, ich hab doch hier einen Homie bei der Polizei, der hat mich da rausgehauen. Hi.
So the game must be amazing, right? Now, look at the footage. Does that look amazing to you? So no, this is not a great game you have to play, but it's a very smart one in what it did. It was a budget title that appealed to the masses, with very simple arcade physics and the idea that you can drive through German cities and over the Autobahn, of course. I mean, we Germans are all about our cars and the Autobahn, so it's practically our national identity. The game is strictly linear and you drive from Berlin over Hamburg, Cologne, Munich and back to Berlin over the course of several races. In between you can upgrade your car or buy a new one and repair the damage taken. The German word Raser doesn't mean racer as you might assume, but speeder, so someone that is continuously ignoring the speed limit. To foster this anti-establishment sentiment, you race through speed traps and escape police cars chasing you. So it's basically your mom saying that you've got Need for Speed Hot Pursuit at home. But there's something here. Maybe it's the joy of just wasting a bit of time with this simpleton racing game, but I have to admit, I drove a few more races than necessary to get the footage for this video. So at least it wasn't a complete waste of time getting this game running on my PC, which was a pain in the ass. Fun fact, there were 2 Knight Rider games using the same engine and made by the same developer, so I guess we can knock another German stereotype off the list. We all love David Hasselhoff. And with this enlightening revelation, I will end the video. Stay retro and see ya!